So we'll get on to our next presenter. So it is Jamie Hascall. Needs probably no introduction. Jamie Hascall. There you go. There you go. And it's Mountmaking in the Mind's Eye.
Oh my, it's finally me. Thanks for all you for coming. This has really just been an amazing thing. I mean, I've been to all but one of the Mountmaking forums, and this one is stunning. You did a great job, guys. All right. So we've been getting just such an amazing amount of information and sharing of tools and techniques and just the insane amount of creativity we've been seeing here today and yesterday. And so I want to talk about a tool that we may not even really think about how we use, but that we're using all the time. And that's our mind's eye. And this is just I've been thinking about this a whole bunch over the past year or so. And I decided this was something that I really wanted to share with you. So when you look at building a mount, what do you do? How do you start? You look at the object, look at the condition report, look at the exhibit design drawings, and talk with the curator, the designer. We start with these kind of perfunctory things, but then what do you get? Do you get a little picture of what you want to do to start? What I really want to know is, what do you see in your mind's eye? What's that thing that's there? And with that question asked, I kind of want to give you a little background on why I've kind of gone in this direction. So, a friend of mine, Elena, is a guitar player and really interesting person. And one day she was just talking and said, people tell me to envision things, and I don't see anything when you say that. Somebody says, envision an apple. I don't get that. And she referred to this as a condition as aphantasia, the inability to envision. So when somebody says envision an apple, she sees this. Not this. Or this. I mean, when I think of envision an apple, I'm thinking of a Red Delicious, well, not very often a Red Delicious, actually, but with the little striations and the bumps at the bottom, or an Ashmead's kernel. There's a better example. A nice russeted green apple with a nice white flesh inside. I really think about apples. I grow apples. Or this. I was a botanist before I was a museum worker. In fact, my first job was at the Field Museum of Natural History, mounting pressed plant specimens because I was studying botany. Or this. I mean, and doesn't this come with a little whiff of cinnamon for you? Our mind's eye is actually way more than visual. It's a very large place in a lot of ways. So I got thinking about all of this and started reaching back into it and trying to figure out how this is. And the first part of that is realizing how differently we each envision, how we each kind of think differently, and it's why we all are producing such incredibly creative solutions to these sorts of things. So I, for one, have an extremely detailed visual mind's eye. I can do basically a 3D CAD rotation in my head. I'm looking at, which way do I want things to be built? Where's my center of gravity? Trying to envision all of that. Different formats of how, if I did it this way or I could hold it this way. So I also have an aural mind's eye. I'm a musician. I'm a banjo player. Well, but I'll have tunes pop up, and I'll start to whistle them. And if I do that, I can actually pull out the fiddle, which isn't my primary instrument. Pretty soon, I can be playing it pretty well, which drives Betsy, my wife, crazy because she is a fiddler and she has to work very hard to put a tune to her fiddle. So as I went and started looking into this, I ran across people like Temple Grandin, and many of you may know Temple Grandin. She's an autistic person who she's written huge amounts on how she sees in pictures, how she thinks in pictures, and how that allows her to figure out what animals see and feel. And she designs livestock restraints or livestock systems and kind of all sorts of stuff. But she's a fascinating speaker. And the autism gives her very distinct abilities because this seeing in pictures sends her into other areas of thinking. People with abilities such as dyslexia also have profound effects. That has profound effects on how we see. So some examples. When I worked at the Burke Museum years ago, I was training a guy by the name of Michael Malang, and he was severely dyslexic. And he'd come to me and he'd say, okay, so Jamie, I want to do this and this and this. And I'm like, Michael, you can't do that. Well, holy smokes, you can do that. And I had to literally turn myself upside down to see the logic path that he had, because I can't think like that. And they worked. They were bizarre from my mind, but they did work. And then I'm going to call out Sakina, who is here in the audience, who's came and took one of my workshops a month or so ago. And she talked about her dyslexia and how her grandmother helped her realize it was her superpower, how she could disassemble and assemble things in her mind. And it augments her CAD and CNC work. And it's just been great seeing you here. So my friend Richard is a guitar player, but he's an ethnomusicologist, he's an extremely learned musician. So when he's playing, he said, he actually sees the musical staff, the notation going by in his head. He's playing from sheet music, except the sheet music is in his head. And I realized when I talked with him that what we see in our mind's eye is all about the tools that we know how to use, and that you can't really envision something that you're not familiar with. So as we develop our mind's eye, it's about developing all our tool using. So one of the books that I found was this, Engineering in the Mind's Eye, and this was written in the early 90s. And Eugene Ferguson talks about how engineering is this conceptual thing as much as it is an analytical practice, and went on, and it was really at the beginning of the time when computers were truly being used in engineering to the detriment, he felt, of the use of the mind's eye. And so he wrote this. A lot of it's really fascinating history of engineering, but he gets into this at the end. And this was one of his quotes about how until the 60s, a student was asked to go and see shops, see processes, so they'd get an intrinsic feel of how materials work, how processes work, and how they don't work. And we've all seen that in drawings done by people that don't actually do work, and that, or I shouldn't say don't do work, don't do the manufacturing. And we have to try to manufacture to a concept that doesn't have materials and processes as part of its generation. And he also talks about in the 80s how the engineering curriculum shifted very much into the analytical from sensual knowledge, and how that seems so much less relevant. He talks about Alan Colquhoun, I guess, but who argues that no matter how rigorous the laws of science are applied to the solution of a design problem, the designer still has to have a mental picture. And I firmly believe this, and that scientific laws are not found in nature, they're constructs of the mind. And one of the things I love about what we do is that we use our minds so much in this. Oliver Sacks is another one. He approached the mind's eye from the point of view of losing one's sight and how to do that. And he talks about Zoltan Torrey, who was a Hungarian psychologist who was blinded in an accident and worked to develop a finer and finer mind's eye. And I think this is the example of where he worked things out so well that he went up on his roof and he replaced his gutters. He's totally blind. His neighbors thought he was crazy, especially since he was doing it at night. But of course, it didn't matter that he was doing it at night because he was blind. It's been really fun doing the research for this because, oh my God, I've seen things that's like, wow, that's really quite something. And yes, that is what the book looks like. It's just this really weird cover. You're going, oh my God. But he also talks about August Kekule, who in 1855 was riding along, and he was a chemist, and he was thinking about the structure of molecules, and he came to this vision in his mind's eye of the structure of the benzene ring and how the bonds worked. And he was right, and it changed the entire way that chemistry is depicted and figured out. And as part of trying to work on this, I've talked to a couple of chemists when I was at the WAC meeting a couple of weeks ago, trying to see if they envisioned structure and if it helped them figure out how to put multiple things together. So it's just a fascinating thing. But I love how he says that to Kekule, that this was visually as imaginable as the lines of force around a magnet were for Faraday. And with all these magnetic talks that we've been having, I've been thinking a lot about that because Gwen Spicer's book, which was cited, is something that you all need, and she goes into great detail on the lines of force and all the magnetic attractions that are part of that. So where does this lead to in reference to Mountmaking? So for me, the analysis of the problem at hand, I'll try to take into account all these things that I've been gathering, all this information, looking at it and looking at the object and holding it and looking at surfaces and trying to figure out weight and all of this stuff and thinking about what the visual outcome is that we want. And yeah, it'll have impressions of weight and balance, the overall structure and condition of the surfaces, force vectors, thinking about seismic stabilization. If we start shaking, what is this thing going to do? I need a little bit more capture over here because there's some weight that is going to be thrown that direction. So really trying to go through it, and I'm using, again, my mind's eye to go and try to figure out some of the alternatives that I could use. I could do it like this, or I could do it like that. So for a quick illustration, this is a piece that I just worked on for the Fry Art Museum in Seattle. It's a trefoil lens, and those are 3 ground, I think they were, ground and polished glass balls. Those are about 2 inches a piece. And then they've been joined here by more hot glass, and it's not even, it's irregular, and so, there's choosing what side is up and this and that. And the museum it's more of a prop than an actual object, but they're putting it into an exhibit, and people are going to look through it. It is a lens, and they wanted it held, and they wanted it kind of a steampunk look. So with that in mind, I start going through, and when I hit something, I'll start sketching. But the mind's eye is where the sketch is coming from. And so, at the beginning, I was thinking, steampunk, and here are kind of claw forms. I rarely make a mount that's artistic, that actually is going to show itself, but this was part of the deal. And so I was thinking of the piano stool claw feet where it's a talon grasping a glass ball and stuff, and so I went down that road for a little while and where the balance point was. But as it went on, it was like, no, I wanted a little plainer than that. And so then as I developed it further, then I went to better drawings, and this is especially as I developed the idea, I'm doing a drawing that I can now communicate the idea to somebody else. I mean, usually the drawings are for my use, and my drawings are not necessarily pretty until I really start doing something like this. On this mount, I went to a hexagonal brass stock and bored a hole here. In the end of this piece, there's a pin coming out of that, and that's a set screw that's securing those, because so this is a solid that's supporting all the weight, and those are 2 removable pieces that are allowing you to actually install the piece. And so that is the back view of it once it was done, and with a black patina, chemical patina on it. And it's all that way, all along the path. My mind's eye is still, working on, it's like that. Now how do I do it? And, kind of close my eyes and kind of look off into the distance and try to think about, oh, I could do that. I could go a little more that way, or I need to bend it there. And so I say, a mount maker staring off into space is not doing something. They're fully engaged usually in the project at hand. And in the end, it was a wonderful mount. And so that's it from the front, and I really liked how it turned out. So in thinking about this, I was concluding, well, how do we actually work with our mind's eye? Because I think we can develop it. I think we can take this ability that we innately have, or I hope innately have. I mean, obviously Elena doesn't have it, and I've had other people that say, oh no, I can't think in 3D. And I actually, at the start of my workshops, I sometimes ask, okay, do you feel you can think in 3D, because you're going to have to do it in this. So all that spatial relation stuff. But we can develop by really observing. And this goes back to Ferguson's whole thing of, watching processes, watching materials, exercising how do materials work, and just coming to things like this. I mean, I've learned so much here in these past 2 days. It's just been stunning. And I'm going to put a lot of those into that storehouse of knowledge for my mind's eye. And then practicing seeing. You know, in the Oliver Sacks book, he talks about people who have lost their sight and who have gone and consciously worked to see in greater and greater detail, and really, you know, rotate things in your mind. I found that one of the things I thought, well, can I envision the interior space that is in the visual shadow? It's not something that I can actually see, but, you know, I can stick a finger in. You know, I was thinking of the interior cavity of a skull. One of the guys at one of my recent workshops brought a bear skull. He was with the Museum of the North in Fairbanks. And you've got the foramen magnum, and you can inevitably go in there, but what does that look like? Can you envision a little bit of, okay, well, there's that much space, there's, you know, some things that are in there. Of course, it isn't exact, but it's something we can use. And then sometimes I've just let my mind wander back to projects I've had and go, let's see, now how did I do that? And could I have done that differently? What would I think of now? So it's just, I want to challenge you to start looking at your mind's eye in a conscious way. And this is just the beginning of a conversation about this. I think it's been funny because I've been talking about this. People are going, oh, well, I do this, and I do this. And it keeps popping up again and again, even if this is not something I've brought up. It's like, well, I was envisioning this. And it's like, see, there it is. This is what I'm going to be talking about. So I encourage you to think about it and expand on all of this and have fun with it. And I want to thank everybody who's come, and, you know, BJ and Elizabeth. You've been two main points, but I know the entire Getty crew and the Getty for allowing us to be here. What a great thing. And then Jack Mackey and the Mountmakers at Seattle Art Museum, where I really got started, and BJ was part of that crew. It was just an amazing place to start. And then obviously my dear wife, Betsy, and my dog, Barlow, who have listened to me rattling on about this again and again. Thank you all.
I think I'm not on, Paul. There we go. Thanks, Jamie. You've given me some new books to add to my list. I was also wondering if you would be willing to email me that list of the books you reference, and then I can email it out to everybody.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, thanks.
This is not a question. It's just I'm incredibly grateful that you talked about this, because I think you can't put enough emphasis on the way that our brains and our minds are sort of wired to figure this out. And I think that anybody that does this for a living, it's just incredibly special. I mean, and everybody finds a different path to their best practice. And I don't think we spend enough time talking about it. So thank you for the thoughtful presentation.
You're welcome. It is one of those things that it's just like, gee, I use this all the time. It is actually something. It is a tool. What am I doing with this? How do I think about this? So, yeah, it's just been a really kind of fun thing to noodle around with.
Thank you. I want to second that thought. It really is a creative process, and I don't think that maybe the people that we work with sometimes allow us that time to just be still and think about how we're going to get started. So it really is in the sense of like being a Renaissance person and knowing how to do all these different things and putting all that together in a creative way. This is more of like a philosophical conversation, really. I mean, we can spend hours talking about it. So thank you for talking today.
You're welcome.
I don't have a question either, Jamie, but I just want to thank you for being a friend and for helping for a long time that we've worked together, and for mentioning your dog.
Barla's an important part of all this. And there are pictures if anybody wants to see them. Because they won't allow me to bring him here. He's in Pasadena right now with Betsy.
So Jamie, the Mounties at the Alaska State Museum, thank you for all you gave them. It's disembodied, so I'm not sure what the context is.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The Mounties at the Alaska State Museum, thank you for all you gave us. That's what it says. I thought you might know what it means.
Okay, that was, so the Alaska State Museum was one of probably the finest project I've ever been involved in, and if you ever have a chance to go to Juneau, go see the Alaska State Museum. But I'm sure that's probably Aaron Elmore and Jackie Manning and folks like that are watching up there.
Thank you, Jamie, for a wonderful story. I'm just curious because you said you're also a musician. Myself, I also play instruments, but I wonder, can you read musical sheets, or are you just improvising as myself? Because I've never mastered reading music, and I don't know, it's a strange thing about how your mind works, but I'm very able to remember texts, lyrics, music, but I can't read musical sheets. So I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm. I did learn to read. I originally, my music was for voice, and I was able to sight read music, sheet music for voice. I've never really worked to translate sheet music for instrument, and especially playing old-time banjo. Sheet music is not really part of that. So the tunes are in my head in that.
Hi, Jamie. So, in the day-to-day and juggling multiple projects, lots of things going on, my mind's eye is kind of a cluttered, messy place. So I'm wondering, what do you do to focus in on that clear sketch, the one that came after the rough one with the claws, and clear out the sketchy bits and focus in on that clear image?
That's a good question, because there are those times when the mind's eye is really cloudy and you're just kind of going, what the heck am I going to do with this? And somehow, it's that time of just mulling it over and maybe going away from it and coming back to that problem. And maybe it's 3 a.m. is often when, something says, oh, by the way, this. Say, oh, wow, okay. And I have to get up and write it down, because there is that thing. And I know from far too much experience that little concept may very well be gone if I try to get back to sleep and I wake up in the morning and go, well, now I had it, but I don't know where it went. So, yeah.
So my question is the most important question. When is the next class?
There are 4 workshops that have just been published on my website. The next one is beginning of December, and the next one is beginning of January, then end of January and into February, and end of February into March. It's nice having a shill in the audience.
I just wanted to thank you again for that. I've been lucky enough to work in a workshop with a lot of other mount makers, and it really, if you talk to anyone else about a mount, you'll come up with 10 different ideas of how to make it. And I've been so grateful to have the opportunity to do that in like having other people around me to talk to about it. What people probably noticed from my talk is I'm one of the few mount makers who's not an artist. Do you have any tips and tricks on how to convey the mind's eye to curators without being able to draw a beautiful picture like you can?
It's hard. And that's where working on your sketching actually is something you kind of have to do. Because I am not an artist in terms of doing, really, clear concept drawing. But I did have to work on a project where I needed to actually put in drawings for engineering review. And so I got much better at using gridded paper and using squares and circle templates and all of those things. And you can do it. It just takes practice like everything else.
I think it's the concept I find hard to convey. I can do the engineering once I've got the time to do it, but when you're trying to throw 10 ideas at a curator...
You don't ever throw 10 ideas at a curator. You give them one.
Speaking of gridded paper and rulers, what is the brand of gridded sketch pad you use and the rulers?
Oh, I actually like the Veritas, the Lee Valley gridded, it's an 8.5 by 11 size spiral bound sketch pad. And it's got scales on both X and Y axis, and it's I think a 1/4 inch grid, and that's my favorite one to work with. And then for rulers, I've got such a variety of everything from metal rulers to I've got a centering ruler that I use a lot. That's a little 6-inch centering ruler that I got from Stuart McDonald Manufacturing, which is a company that sells musical instrument parts, guitar parts and banjo parts and building stuff. All right. Thank you all.